Hey everybody, this is Owen from Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast, and before we get into the action today, I wanted to take a few seconds to talk about Anchor. Anchor is a great app and it is free to use. It's the easiest way to make a podcast. Did I mention it's free? There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will even distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. That's the Anchor app or anchor.fm to get started today. Happy podcasting. And now, let's get into it. What's going on, everybody? This is Owen from Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast. Thank you for tuning in for another episode of this wonderful program we are producing for you all today. Today is June the 24th, 2021. Episode 17 is coming up for you guys. I want to thank you all for listening. Wherever you may be, however you may be listening, I thank you for tuning in. It's hard to believe we are already 17 episodes into this program, and I look forward to keeping it going for many, many more episodes. I appreciate all of your support. If you enjoy what you hear here today, share it with your friends, pass it along to family, anybody you can. I want to get as many people as possible to listen to this, so that would be really awesome if you folks who enjoy it could share it with others who you think may enjoy. So like I said, we have episode 17 on deck here today. The topic is The Battle at Garden's Gate, Greta Van Fleet's newest album, released April 16th, 2021. Greta Van Fleet, a band that has caused lots of controversy and lots of interest in the rock world over the past several years. Greta Van Fleet is one of my favorite bands, so you will definitely hear a perspective today that is slanted in the direction of Greta Van Fleet. I am definitely in favor of them. It's been 2 years now since I saw them in concert, June 2nd, 2019, up in Cleveland. My friend John and I went up there to check them out. Phenomenal. This is their third release, second album, third overall release. They had their first album. Well, I don't know if it's called an album or an LP or an EP, however they refer to it. Their first release, it's called From the Fires. That features a lot of their classic material, Highway Tune, Safari Song, a lot of the stuff that really broke them in, really allowed them to burst onto the scene. Then their first official album, Anthem of the Peaceful Army, was received to a lot of negative reviews, a lot of criticism, which is nothing Greta Van Fleet is new to. Almost their entire career, they have faced some sort of criticism, often for being compared to Led Zeppelin, which, as a Greta Van Fleet fan and a big Led Zeppelin fan, as you may recall, last week we talked about Led Zeppelin 2 on the show, and in the very first episode of Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast, we talked about Led Zeppelin 1. So I am clearly a Led Zeppelin fan, so I'm not biased when they say this. I think the comparisons between the two are tired. I think they're worn out. And I think with this album, their latest one, The Battle at Garden's Gate, released in 2021, I think they really escape the Zeppelin comparisons and start to make a name for themselves and start to develop their own sound. So, Greta Van Fleet is part of this kind of rock revival we see going on in rock music. And they are one of my favorites in rock currently. Currently active bands, a young band, a band that has a large future ahead of it. They have, they're not old, they're not on the back nine of their career, so to speak. They have a lot ahead of them, and I'm definitely looking forward to what they put out in the future. Another band that is new on the scene and is exciting is Dirty Honey, and we will be talking about their first album next week, self-titled album Dirty Honey. If you have not heard that album, I would definitely check it out. Check out both of these albums because they are definitely worth your time. So let's talk about The Battle at Garden's Gate. So as I mentioned, Greta Van Fleet had 2 prior releases. Their first technical album, Anthem of the Peaceful Army, I enjoyed that album, but as soon as they finished up that album, they got to work on The Battle at Garden's Gate. They began writing tracks, often, I believe it was while they were touring, so that's where some of the tracks came from. Some of the inspiration came from while they were on tour, and different themes related to travel and freedom and just being out on the open road. So you definitely can hear that in their music. The album is produced by Greg Kurstin, who most notably worked recently with Foo Fighters on Concrete and Gold and Medicine at Midnight. That is their last 2 releases. And if you look back to episode 5 of Owen's Rock and Metal podcast, we covered Medicine at Midnight when it was released. I believe it was released back in January or February, but early 2021. And that was a very solid album. I was very happy to say that within the last few weeks, I added that album to my record collection. The Battle at Garden's Gate was also in my record collection. I bought that pretty much the day that it came out. So I was very stoked for both of those records. But interesting to know, upon doing research for the show, that they share a producer. So I think that's rather interesting. And Greta Van Fleet is also going to be playing some shows in Europe with the Foo Fighters come 2022. So that is something to look forward to if you are in Europe and listening to the show and you're a fan of Greta Van Fleet or the Foo Fighters. Before the whole pandemic hit, Greta Van Fleet was scheduled to play some shows in South America with Metallica. And if you're familiar with me or the show at all, I love me some Metallica and I love me some Greta Van Fleet. So those would have been quite the show to go to. Different sounds. Metallica is the biggest metal band of all time, and Greta Van Fleet is kind of a new wave rock band who's received quite a bit of criticism. So kind of a dichotomy, kind of a different in sound there, but it'd be interesting to hear them at the same show, and it'd kind of be the best of both worlds, kind of a newer rock sound versus, Metallica, an institution in the genre of metal. But that's getting a little bit off track here. Let's keep it on the topic of the album. So, as I mentioned, the band they do expand their musical sound here. They add a lot more layers, a lot more texture, a lot more cryptic writing, a lot more deep music. It's more complex. That's a good way to put it. And that was exactly what they were looking for. They were looking to expand their themes of the music. They were looking to be broader, and they succeeded in that, if you ask me. I think the song, even if you look at just the song lengths are longer. The music it's better, it's more intricate, it's a higher difficulty. The lyrics, what they're singing about, it's less just surface level, stuff. They refer to this album as kind of being almost relating to some biblical themes and talking about ancient civilizations. So it's some deeper stuff. And sometimes when reading the lyrics leading up to this show, I was kind of, I couldn't really take away a meaning of the song, I can read off the page, oh, this is what he's singing here, but in terms of what he's talking about, sometimes it was difficult for me as a listener to take in what exactly he's saying. But, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. But I think it shows development and progress for the band as a whole. So I think that's good. If you're a fan of Greta Van Fleet, and I think if you're a fan of rock music and you want to see new young acts come up into rock music, then I think you should definitely be a fan of Greta Van Fleet. I think you should check out their music. I think we should be, as a rock community, I think we should be supportive of Greta Van Fleet and not try to cut them down and say, oh, they sound like Led Zeppelin, they suck. Because that's really, if my band sounded like Led Zeppelin, I'd be pretty stoked. So that's my thought on that. I'm sure most of you who are familiar with rock music have heard the comparisons between Greta Van Fleet and Led Zeppelin. But going into this album, I think they successfully shed that comparison, even though some will still make it. And there's a new comparison. They sound like Rush, or he sings like Geddy Lee from Rush. I think people are just looking for comparisons at that point, and I think they can't just appreciate the music at face value for what it is. But upcoming to the album's release back in April, there were 4 singles released. They also had live performances on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert and on Jimmy Kimmel Live. So there was an increased push to promote the album and to get more eyeballs on what Greta Van Fleet was cooking up for us here, which turned out to be The Battle at Garden's Gate. The first single, My Way Soon, was released back in October. I remember seeing it on Instagram, and I was stoked. Second one, Age of Machine, was released in December 2020. The third single, Heat Above, was released February 10th, a day after my birthday. And that was a nice late birthday gift from the boys in Greta Van Fleet. That is the first track on the album, and we're going to get into that in just a second. But that is one of my favorite songs off the album. And then the fourth single, Broken Bells, was released sometime in March. And that is another quality track that we will be getting into. And we're going to get into all of those tracks and more once we get into the track-by-track breakdown here. So, as I said, we're going to start us off here with track 1 on this album, Heat Above. And something interesting I liked that they did with the album, there are different symbols that go with each track. I have my CD copy in front of me here, and the track listing is, listed on the back as would be with any normal CD, and there's little drawings next to each track. I'm not sure what they represent, but I think that's kind of a little neat addition that the band went with. And I do like, I'm holding the CD here, I also have the copy of vinyl downstairs, and I like the inner fold, the artwork that they have. It is depicting the quote-unquote battle at Garden's Gate. The garden is obviously like the Garden of Eden. It's a biblical reference. And I think it wouldn't be a stretch to call this album a concept album. I think it's talking about everything outside the garden being a quote-unquote utopia, a garden being a place of almost perfection. And everything outside of that is the quote-unquote battle, and that's kind of the struggle that maybe humanity is going through. Everyone can have their own separate interpretation on that. But if we get into the first track, Heat Above, like I said, it starts off with a nice, beautiful organ intro. It's one of my favorite tracks on the album. I'll pick a favorite track by the end of this, but Heat Above is probably tied for that with another song that we'll get into later on. But if you think of this album as a narrative, if you think of it as a concept album, the band has described this song as the conclusion to that narrative. Henceforth, it is what lies inside the Garden's Gate. It is what happens when you are victorious in the battle. As the line suggests, ascending to the stars as one. That beings, humanity, rising to a higher presence, a higher plane of existence, maybe that's heaven, whatever you choose to believe, but it's something greater than what we are in our physical presence here on Earth. This song is beautiful. A big highlight of the band, their sound overall, and especially on this album, I think Josh Kiska, the lead singer, has an incredible voice, even though that's honestly what got them their recognition. The comparisons to Zeppelin, oh my god, listen to this kid, listen to what he sounds like. He sounds a lot like Robert Plant. And I think his vocal, not only his range, but his pitch and his control and just how he sounds, it can be a little sharp to the ear for people who are new to listening it. It can kind of make them turn away, but I would encourage them, I'm not going to say his voice is for everybody, but I really like his voice, and I can understand if you don't like it for whatever reason, but I would hope you wouldn't let that stop you and you could look past it. But on Heat Above, his voice is definitely high up in the range, and I love what he's singing about here. I really like the flow of the lyrics, and I like what he's singing about. But yeah, it's depicting what lies inside the garden. It's meant to be a conclusion to the narrative that is traced throughout this album. It's an incredible start to the album. When this was released as a single, I had it on repeat for several days. I really love this song. It's one of my favorites. The vocals are phenomenal, and it's a great way to kick off this album. So we move in now to track number 2, and this was what was the first single released back in October 2020, and that is called My Way Soon. Now, upon listening to this track for the first time, I had the expectation this album was going to be pretty rocking, because this track has some of the most quote-unquote rock vibes. It's some of the most, it's more riff-based. It's maybe a simpler lyrics. It's not a deeper meaning that, one has to struggle and strain to figure out what are they talking about here. The song is about travel. It's about freedom. It's really, you get the vibes that it's inspired by tour life. The opening lyrics, I've seen many people, I've seen many places, that kind of vibes. Like, I choose the road, let my hair down, and I'm going. I throw out the plans because who needs them? Like, I'm free as a bird. I'm just going to go travel, choose my own adventure, just do my thing. Nothing about, any of this existence matters. And, the band, they have a site where you can, quote-unquote, explore the battle at Garden's Gate, and you can kind of link different things in the interfold artwork to different tracks, and they explain a brief little sentence or two meaning of what the song is talking about. And the band points out that, hey, maybe My Way Soon is one where it's, outside of the narrative of the album. And then they kind of lead with an ampersand an ellipsis. My English teachers would be very disappointed in me if I confused an ampersand for an ellipsis. But anyway, they say maybe this track is outside the narrative of the album, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's part of this message. So I love that they are kind of leaving up to interpretation for the listener to say, yes, this song is part of a broader narrative here, or it's a one-off track that was kind of separate before, separate from the rest of the tracks and separate from an overall message. And, I don't really have a place for that, but I think the message that the song is delivering, whether it fits into the narrative of the album or not, I think it's a valuable message, and I like the vibe of it, and it's something that I love to play with the windows down, and it really is one of my favorite tracks on the album. It just gets me going. It's a good one to return to, and I love the guitar-centered kind of vibe with it. I love that the guitar is present. It's not more of a supporting role. It's more of a lead role. It's front and center. As a guitar player, I love to see it. And I love the line, "I'll throw out the plans and live with no burden." Sums up the song perfectly. Going through life with no plan and just getting through it step by step. I think it's a good motto, and I think it's something that, some people could benefit to follow. So we transition now to track 3, that is Broken Bells. That was the 4th and final single released from the album. This is described as losing one's primal innocence as we face the world. When we are brought into the world, the soul is perfect. But when faced with the tribulations of our man-made society, the self becomes damaged, working within the confines of such. That is a quote from Explore the Battle at Garden's Gate, the website that the Greta Van Fleet had made, where you could kind of discover the meaning, or at least their prescribed meaning of different tracks. And that interpretation from the band was definitely helpful because, reading the lyrics and just kind of trying to sit down and decipher, just listening to the track, no immediate meaning jumped out to me. And it's kind of a head scratcher for me. What are they talking about? What is a broken bell referring to? It's obviously something that they say in the song, even broken bells will ring, and a broken bell isn't meant to ring. So I'm not sure. Take from that quote what you want, what you will. The song has kind of a slow build-up, and interestingly enough, the kind of repeated riff, we'll call it, that's cycled throughout the track, comes from Danny Wagner's Instagram post he made several years ago, where he was playing that on an acoustic guitar in what looks like his bedroom. For those who don't know, Danny Wagner is the drummer for Greta Van Fleet, and it's interesting to see that, this little thing he put on his Instagram of him playing on guitar in 2017 is now featured on their record they made in 2021. So it just shows from a musician's perspective that those ideas, no idea ever goes to waste, or nothing is ever completely thrown away, that it can always be brought back and cycled in again. And I just thought that was a nice, interesting connection. Throughout the song, there's a gradual build-up musically. They layer more instruments in there, things are added. I really like the guitar solo here from Jake Kiska, the lead guitarist. It stands out for me. That's kind of what I would highlight away from the song, that guitar solo and that guitar part later on in the track. It's not as prevalent early on in the track. Like I said, the meaning and what the lyrics are actually talking about might be a little beyond me, but I'll read that quote one more time. Losing one's primal innocence as we face the world. When we are brought into the world, the soul is perfect. But when faced with the tribulations of our man-made society, the self becomes damaged, working within the confines of such. So I think it's kind of saying, maybe we are the broken bell, that we still ring out even in this society that has these sort of quote unquote, damages of being man-made or whatever. However you choose to interpret that, I think there is a deeper meaning there that could be pulled out, and there might be many different meanings depending on what your perspective is. So we move on now to track number 4. That is Built by Nations. And just as I said, My Way Soon, track 2, was another track that has that rock vibe. Built by Nations also kind of has a riff-centered song structure that is more quote-unquote rock in nature. And I know that's kind of an ambiguous meaning. What does that even refer to? Rock, it's all supposedly rock. But I think heavier is the word, and I think, thinking about what's more guitar-centered and what's more in line with the typical historical definition of rock, even though that historical definition is very expansive as is. So when I say rock, I guess I mean something more heavier and more guitar-based, in terms of riff and that kind of song structure. So the lyrics deal with themes of war and killing another, and just kind of the horrors and the stuff like that that are associated with war and killing. So this, the lyrics describe hellish nature of war. I like the riff that he's playing here, and then the vocals, he really cranks them up. It's not like a screamo, but he's pushing his range, you can sense it, and he's really getting a lot out of his voice. And then the solo work is impressive in the end. I think if I'm talking about, what portions of the songs I typically am favorable towards, it's definitely the guitar solo and the guitar parts. As a guitar player, call me a little biased. And the vocals. Josh Kiska does an amazing job. So those two are definitely highlights of this song. And I love the bend that is played just as a kind of a transition into the guitar solo. It's a very solid track, and definitely not one that I'm going to skip when it comes on. We move on now to track 5, Age of Machine, and this was one that was the second single released from the band in December of 2020. And just as Heat Above was supposed to be a depiction of a human utopia and a world inside the garden, Age of Machine is the opposite. It is meant to be a contrast to that. It's the world outside the gate. It's the idea of mankind needing quote-unquote healing from the source of mankind's troubles, whether that is society or technology or anything that is a product of society. It's similar to Broken Bells, where there's a musical build-up, and the guitar solo kind of acts as a big middle stopper, big middle piece where the musical kind of nature of the track changes, and then later on it kind of refers back to, whether it's a chorus repeat or kind of return back to the subtler vibes that were introduced early on in the track. So I think they do a good job of that, where it's kind of introduction. It's kind of like a story roller coaster that we all kind of learned about in like elementary school when you learned about how a story goes. It's kind of introduction, and then it kind of peaks in the guitar solo, and then it kind of comes back down for the conclusion, where it kind of mirrors the tone and the kind of theme that is introduced in the introduction. So I think that what it's talking about is interesting, and I think when I first heard about the song title, all I could think about was the first track from Anthem of the Peaceful Army called Age of Man. So on their first album, they have a song called Age of Man. Second album, they have a song called Age of Machine. So I wasn't sure if there was a relation there. I didn't read about one, and the meaning of Age of Man is not, something that I have, present in my brain at the moment. But Age of Machine, like I said, it's kind of about that world outside of the quote-unquote garden, outside of a utopia, where, man is really plagued by, whatever it may be, society, technology. I think that's kind of up to the listener's interpretation, but there is some kind of plague going on. The track is very solid. It's kind of smoother. There's this repeated little riff, we'll call it, that's just kind of cycled throughout in the background, and the vocals are incredible once again, but I expect nonetheless from Mr. Josh Kiska. So this is where the album kind of switches a little bit in my mind. I think those first 5 tracks, I mean, you look at it, 4 of them were singles, or actually, yeah, that was all 4 of the singles in the first 5 tracks. So the big commercially pushed songs, the songs that you were likely to hear before the release of the album, we've gotten through those. Those are done. So now from track 6 to track 12, which is where the album ends, that's where the new stuff was introduced. So my first time listening, that was where, I kind of, okay, what am I going to get into here? So the next track is called Tears of Rain, and the religious themes are really present in this lyric. There's kind of a famine of hope, a drought of hope, and there's just prayer just for something to come and just change, answer these people's prayers, so to speak. As the line suggests, who will bring the rain? It's almost like someone calling out to the heavens, as a drought was going on in some ancient civilization. That's the imagery I am having put into my head when I listen to this song. And there's, musically speaking, there's kind of an acoustic track, not acoustic track, but like an acoustic vibe opening up the song. It's kind of a slower build, and then it kind of opens up musically, and the vocals really come front and center towards the second half of the song, where the chorus just kind of becomes repeated. I love the sound of his voice here, and then, it's just kind of the line, who will bring the rain, is repeated throughout. And then we get to the end, and it just kind of fades, and things get quiet, and we get a thunder sound, and then we get a nice piano. We get, I believe it's 2 chords to close us out, and it's just so crisp and clean. And the first time I heard it, I was like, oh my God, that is so good. I really love the ending of this song. And I showed someone, I'm like, right here. And like I turned it up, and it was just 2 chords really spaced out and really just those chords were just allowed to breathe, and they were just like, and I'm like, no, like, you don't get it. Like, it just, that moment really resonated with me. The vocals are very strong here, and this is another nice track overall. One that's softer in nature, in tone, but still powerful enough through vocal presence and the strength that you can kind of feel behind his voice. So we move on now to track 7. And this one goes by the name of Stardust Chords. And when I first heard this song title, when I first saw it, like when I was looking at the album track listing on the night of its release, and I was kind of like, that's an interesting title. I wasn't sure what to expect from it, but it has quickly grown into one of my favorite songs on the album. And it's all in his voice. It's incredible. But in terms of the meaning of the song, it's pretty much centered around 2 chords. The meaning of the song, it's related to kind of, I think, the whole kind of album in general, this broader, Battle at the Garden's Gate, this kind of fight to get to this utopia and just kind of what's going on just directly outside the gate. That's kind of what I'm picturing when listening to it and interpreting the lyrics. I love the vocals. I don't know if I've said that enough. It's my favorite vocal performance from Josh Kiska out of all Greta Van Fleet songs. He just pushes his voice to a different level, a different tone, a different sound is coming out of his voice. The chorus leaves me in awe. That is what I wrote in my notes, and it is so true. I walk around the house singing this, doing my best Josh Kiska. I don't nearly have the range. I drive around in my car, windows down, screaming it at the top of my lungs, singing it with all my heart. It is so good. I love to sing along with it, even though I may sound like dog shit, but it's so good. It's one of my favorites from the album. It as I said, I would pick a favorite track. There's 2 songs that are tied for my favorite track on this album, and that's Stardust Chords and Heat Above. Those songs, there's just something about them that separates them. Maybe it's the lyrics, maybe it's all of it combined. Maybe it's the vocals and the band. Maybe they're just making a different sound that just really connects with me here. But Stardust Chords, it's got a really not funky intro, but it's got a really kind of almost spiritual sounding intro, and that leads us into this kind of 2 chords just going back and forth. It's kind of simple musically, and then Josh just wows me again with the vocals on Stardust Chords. So really big fan of that song. We move on now to track 8, that is Light My Love. And before I even heard the song, I said, oh, they have a song called Light My Love. That's going to be an incredible song. I knew before I'd even heard it, and I was right. The song is great. Greta singing about love, and the song title, Light My Love. I'm not sure what exactly it is, but just that title, I'm like, this song has potential. It's going to be good. I can feel it. And it turns out this was the first track recording in the production process. This is where they kind of knew they were going to be compatible with their producer, as that's very important. Bands got to be able to click with their producer. So this was the track when they recorded it and laid it down. Greta said, you know what? We got our guy in Greg Kirsten. So yeah, I knew I would enjoy the track just from the title. We have a fade in and then a nice little piano part and then a swelling with the whole drums and the whole band is just there, and then that sound kind of drops out, and I just love it. It's related to the passion that we feel for things. Love. It's about love and the passions that are associated with love. The vocals are great. I love the lyrics. And the line, can you light my love, or your mind is a stream of color, and just it's almost like, it's not like, I love you or anything like that. It's love on like a higher plane, on like a spiritual level. And I'm going to take a pause here just to say I apologize if you can hear my dog barking in the background. Lord knows I can hear her barking, and it's really annoying me, but I apologize for this interruption if it is, able to be heard at all. But back to Light My Love. It's about almost love and a passion on a higher plane. I love it. And it makes me think about my beautiful girlfriend, Rhiannon. I definitely enjoy just listening to it, and yeah. Anyway, that is my thoughts on Light My Love. Great song. Definitely check it out. Track 9, we have Caravel. And this was one of the final tracks that they recorded during the pandemic. It was one of the last ones to be, produced and recorded and written and all that jazz. But, I liked the song. It's got kind of a drum-centered introduction, and then we transition into kind of a more guitar riff, and then, of course, Josh is killing it with the vocals again. He's really pushing that range. And this whole time, I was like, I don't know what a caravel is. Like, what is it? So in the research process for this podcast, I found out what a caravel is. And it is the name of a sailing ship that was used during the 15th and 17th centuries in, Spain and Portugal. And it really made exploration easier, made things faster because of its size and its speed. So that now knowing what a caravel is, it totally clicks. The lyrics are focused on travel and humans' desire to explore, and how we're always looking over new horizons and we're always looking to be something greater. It's another solid track. And the line that keeps kind of resonating throughout the track and is repeated, this is the age of the caravel. This is the time we'll remember well. This idea of an age of exploration, it's kind of prevalent in the title, which I was not unsure of the meaning of, but now that I know, it definitely reflects that. And there's another song on here. I believe it's the Barbarians, or maybe not. I think one of them is centered around the California Gold Rush. Maybe it's the Weight of Dreams. I can't remember, and I feel bad for leaving out that information. But this idea of exploration is something that, it's relative to civilization, so it makes sense why that theme was included in the album. So we move on to track 10, that is The Barbarians. This was the final addition to the album during the production process. This was the last one they produced and made and put together. And the opening guitar riff is incredible. I love the tone he's putting on it. I'm not sure what exactly effects he's using and all that jazz, but it's like, not like he's shredding, but I just like to say, oh man, he's shredding, but he's not technically shredding. He's killing it. It's probably the best recorded guitar part I've heard on a Greta Van Fleet record. When I saw them live, they definitely would break into long instrumental sections where Jake Kiska, the guitar player, would really shine and flex his muscle, so to speak. But here in a recorded take that's featured on an album, it's really impressive, and it really shows for a larger audience that, hey, my name's Jake Kiska, and you're watching Disney Channel, and this is what I can do. So I really just love that. And the Barbarians is one that, after the album's initial release in the weeks following, I didn't really play and didn't have on repeat as much, but I've heard it enough to kind of, have it resonate with me, and it's clicked with me, and I've enjoyed what I've heard. The lyrics are centered around the spoiling of youth, children being tainted by society. So, that might be what the Barbarians are focused on, the spoilers, or those who do the quote-unquote tainting. The song is very good musically. I think the guitar work is probably the most impressive thing, and that's what stands out to me here. The vocal performance as well is also very impressive, and I love the song. It's not one of my favorites, and it's not one that, it's like, oh, I want to play this one. But occasionally I'll be like, oh, I want to hear that opening guitar part. But The Barbarians is a perfectly fine track, and if you're sitting there listening through the album, I wouldn't skip it. There aren't really any tracks on here that I'd skip. We move now to track 11, Trip the Light Fantastic, and when I initially had heard it, this was one of my favorites. It was between this one and Built by Nations. Those were like, oh yeah, those are my two, but after listening to it more and more, I've kind of developed the more concrete two as Heat Above and Stardust Chords. That's what those would be. But Trip the Light Fantastic has a beautiful organ keyboard. I'm not sure what he's playing here, but that's the nice introduction. The song intro, it has almost like a light feeling, like the sunshine, or something like that. The band has described the song as spiritual. Mankind is not bound to earthly beings. That is a quote from the Explore page, where you can explore the quote-unquote battle at Garden's Gate. It's got a really bright sound. And then there's like group harmonies, vocals that they're making. They just repeat this phrase, rum, 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 just over and over and over again during like a chorus-like part, and I really like that. I think that really just, it makes me think of just the connective nature in a group-like setting, and that's something I like about Greta's music. It makes me feel like part of a bigger group, part of something bigger than myself. Greta has put out this idea of, the peaceful army, and that's just looking to maybe heal the world or bring people closer together, one piece of music at a time. And I love that kind of vibe, and I love that kind of message. And they have a song on their first album, Anthem, and that sets out to deliver the same kind of message. So, not saying Trip the Light Fantastic has that meaning in its lyrics, but that is what the music and the lyrics, maybe not the lyrics, but part of the group-like vocals make me feel. So this is an incredible song. It's great. And for the later half of the album, it's something that I go back to quite a bit. And now we move to track 12, something that I did not go back to quite a bit originally. The Weight of Dreams, when I first listened through the album all the way when it was released, I heard that song, and then I probably didn't listen to it for 2 to 3 weeks because it's like, there's other good songs, and that one was kind of longer, and there was, it didn't stick with me as much. But this one, I have gone back to it since, and I have appreciated, and I've taken some time to really acknowledge the beauty that is within this track. This track originated as a live jam session of sorts, and I remember seeing them live in concert, and they broke into this jam session, and my friend and I, we couldn't remember what it was called, and I would bet that was portions of The Weight of Dreams. That was kind of the end of the track, where they do have a sort of jam session featured in the recording. So the work grew into the conclusion that, into the piece that would conclude this album. The lyrics are focused on, quote-unquote, mankind's thirst for power. So this is kind of focused on greed and all that kind of themes that would be something that you would find outside of the garden for sure. And I think this was the track that was related to the California Gold Rush. I enjoyed it, and I'll admit, I slept on it originally. I'm like, The Weight of Dreams, it's just all right. But I love the guitar part. I love the little acoustic guitar melody that's repeated, that's kind of introduced at the beginning and then repeated really softly as an intro, as not an intro but an outro rather, to finish the album. I really love that. I've grown to enjoy this track more and more. The jam portion towards the end is killer. I think the band is really at their best. They're all playing phenomenally and they're all playing together, and that's the important thing. And the track ultimately fades out and it concludes this epic album. So we get into my final thoughts and evaluation of the album as a whole. The album is amazing. Greta Van Fleet, they're one of my favorite bands. I love that they're young and up and coming. I love also that the fact that 3 of them are brothers. There's Josh, Jake, and Sam Kiska. The singer, Josh Kiska, the guitar player, Jake Kiska, and the bass/keyboardist, Sam Kiska. All 3 of them are brothers. And then there is drummer Danny Wagner, who was a childhood friend. It's something really cool. 3 siblings and a childhood friend, all from this small town in Michigan, are now making it as big-time rock stars. You know, maybe it's part of something that, you know, I had a dream of being a rock star once, so it's cool to see people like this making their dreams come true. Maybe that's why I have such an affinity towards them, or maybe it's just that they're a young rock band with a new sound that's introducing this sound to a younger generation of people, and I love to see that. I like how I say younger generation of people as if I am not part of that younger generation, but I'll say that introducing rock to a new audience, and I love to see that. It was a total pleasure to see them live, and I cannot wait until I see them again, which I definitely will see them again. Not in 2021 because they have limited dates, but 2022 or 2023, whenever, I will be sure to get to them. In terms of how the album performed, it peaked at number 7 on the Billboard 200 charts here in the US of A. I think this really showed that Greta has escaped these Led Zeppelin comparisons, and I think those who continue to make those comparisons are fools, and they are people who just do not listen and just parrot whatever they hear on the internet. They have formed their own sound, they are their own band, and I have a great amount of respect and admiration for what they have done so far, and I look forward to what they continue to do in the future, and I wish them all the best, and I am waiting with bated breath for what is coming down the pipeline from Greta Van Fleet. If I had to score The Battle at Garden's Gate, their 2021 release, I would give it a 9.5 out of 10. And that's high praise, obviously. 9.5 out of 10 is a very solid score. So that's about going to do it. That's about going to do it. What am I trying to say here? That's going to do it for us here at Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast. We have just covered The Battle at Garden's Gate from Greta Van Fleet, released on April 16th, 2021, the latest release from the foursome from Michigan. Big fan of their music, and I look forward to what they continue to put out. Be sure to tune in with us next week, episode 18, where we talk about Dirty Honey's debut album, released in 2021. Another 2021 record from a new young rock band, and another one that I did enjoy very, very much. So be sure to tune in for that if you are interested in that. And be sure to check out past episodes if you want to hear past topics that I have talked about. We did Led Zeppelin 2 last week, Highway to Hell the week before that, and we have plenty of episodes going back, so be sure to check those out. And be sure to share it with a friend if you like what you heard here today. I would really appreciate it. And yeah, I think that's about all I've got to say. And as always, can't forget this: never stop rocking.